It's so nice to be here.
The
It's
first
so nice.
3-person conversation. So we're going to see how this goes, but there's going to be a lot of chat in this one. So
Yeah.
Are you guys ready?
We're always ready. It's always chaotic just between the two of us, to be honest. So
100%. Also, I did wake up literally half an hour ago and have like basically run to get to this microphone. So I am a bit out of it, but I'm so ready.
You don't look like you woke up 30 minutes ago.
In that half an hour, a lot was done.
Lots of them happened.
Are you okay?
It's been a big 30 minutes.
I'm
Processing the last 30 minutes of your life. Well, I want to ask you guys a bit about the background of Goes Without Saying, your podcast that you started several years ago now. Why did you start a podcast and why are you still going?
Oh, go on, Wayne, you take it.
Good questions. Okay, so I feel like we always have like slightly different versions of the same story. So I'd be interested to hear what you would say, Sephy, even though I know we've spoken about this before because we always just talk about ourselves. We can't help it. Like, our favourite topic ever is Goes Without Saying by Sephy and Wang. Like, we cannot shut up about Sephy and Wang. I always think it started from us naturally having a lot of very interesting conversations. We were living together at the time. We were in our 3rd year of uni. And I feel like that living room, like in that house, a magical space. I can really, it's so vivid, that memory.
I mean, it was a filthy old student living room, but for a reason.
It was so small as well. We were like physically on top of each other. Yeah.
An oven in the middle of the room.
Just on top of the sofa, basically.
It was hideous.
We were really on top of each other, like couldn't get away from each other. And I think that allowed for...
Yeah.
There was like no choice but to kind of like go in. It's like, oh, you want to sit in the living room? You want to sit down? Well, you have to engage in 3 hours of conversation about private schools versus like state school. You know, it was like really deep from the get-go. And weirdly, I think we both liked internet kind of content and have a bit of ego about us. And we thought, I could do that. But I definitely felt like it was never something I was going to do on my own. And I think we started when we were like 22 or something. And I think even then I thought I was maybe too old to start something.
There's a lot literally
I know.
When
There's a lot to unpack here. But I think I kind of thought, well, it hasn't happened now. So it's never going to happen. And I think I felt as well like I was waiting for someone to give me permission to do it.
And then I came along.
And Sephy came along. And that was the closest I got, I think, to permission, in the sense that we were having these deep conversations. It was like really, really fun. And I think I always think at the beginning we like kind of pushed each other. Like we would kind of be like, well, what 100%. If you did let yourself, you know, think like that? Or what if you did let yourself imagine what that could be like, sort of thing?
You think it was permission or validation, like to start it? Do you know what I mean? Like that your voice is valid to put out there rather than permission to...
Yeah.
100%. Go on, Sephy, you take us away from there.
Well, yeah, I think I have the same thing, but we also didn't come into it being like, we're starting a podcast. We started like an Instagram first where we would do like tarot readings and like astrology stuff. And I feel like that's kind of not what we wanted to do, but it provided enough of a gateway that it's like, we can do this thing and then pivot that to actually do the thing we want to do, so that it wasn't so embarrassing to start from scratch. I think we just had this idea of like people finding it and just a nightmare. But for some reason, this astrology thing, we could be really shameless about it and like scream about it from the rooftops because it wasn't really about us in any way. And then like when we got about 1,000 followers on there, we were like, none of them cared about us at all. We just like basically would like follow people and be like, hi, please watch back. Like, nobody cared. Then we were like, right, okay, let's do this as a podcast, which still had a terrible name. It was called Higher Priestess. It was like awful
God, honestly.
vibes.
Yeah.
I mean, great vibes, but terrible name. And then we were like, no, fuck it. After about a year of that, we're like, fuck it, let's do Sephy and Wing.
Yeah. I don't even think we had the brains to be like, oh, if we start like this, then we can shift it and flip it into us and blah, blah, blah. Like when we'll gain more confidence and flip it. It was kind of, I think it was almost not accidental, but it was just very natural. It was very
organic.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't kind of premeditated. We will start it about astrology, and then once we've got people, we can be like, jokes, it's actually us, haha, sort of thing. It wasn't planned.
When you look back, I think the only reason we did start it is because we had this sort of like disguise for it.
100%.
It's
Yeah, it's
interesting
safer.
that it's like when people in high school, they start a YouTube channel and you find out and everyone would be like, oh my goodness, this is so embarrassing. It's like that fear of putting yourself out there.
Boy,
But
do I know that.
it's cool if you've got 200,000 subscribers and you're making loads of money from it, but it's not cool until you get to a certain point.
It's mortifying, it's terrifying, like, but that's how all these things start. And that's the mortifying, embarrassing thing. Like, it's embarrassing to be the little girl on her guitar with her ringlets, beautiful girl, do we know where we're going? Before you know it, you're Taylor Swift.
Exactly. Justin Bieber, he uploaded videos to YouTube, didn't he?
Exactly.
By some talent guy.
Yeah.
Right? Was it? Might have been Usher. Maybe.
Is that ringing any bells?
Yeah, no, I think it was Usher. But I remember that video coming out, and then this girl that was like in my year, she's like the cool girl, was like, I've got something to show you. Write this name in your planner, Justin Bieber. And I wrote it all wrong, like Bieber, like all really wrong. And then I went home, put that into YouTube, and I was like, oh my.
Life changed forever.
Well, do you remember school planners? You've just given me a bit of a flashback.
Yeah.
I've still got some of mine. One of them's got
I've got one.
like Robert Pattinson, like I've glued him into the front, like staring at Bella.
As Edward.
Good
Whoa.
times. Yeah.
You're 22 and you think, I'm past it, can't do it now.
Yeah.
That's it. Whereas if you can actually just start with the world of online things. You can start a YouTube channel today. You can start a podcast today. You can set up an Etsy account and sell whatever you want really on it. There's actually an endless amount of opportunities, but it does involve putting yourself out there. Because for me, I guess I wasn't talking about myself. I was talking about other people. But equally, I started a podcast from nothing really. I went straight into it. And I remember the first person who I had on the podcast was Flora Beverly. And she being, the Beverly sisters, you've got Grace Beverly, who started like so many businesses. You've got Flora, who's been on Instagram, on YouTube for so long and having, quite a big platform on there. I remember sitting down to record my first ever podcast. And I genuinely nearly cancelled it like 3 times before doing it because I was just like, who am I to talk to Flora Beverly? I'm not sure if she knew that I hadn't ever recorded an episode before, and I wasn't going to tell her this. But I was literally so scared. And I look back at it now and about, oh my goodness, that's such a terrible... I've never actually rewatched it. I don't want to. And since putting that out. But you do need to put yourself out there in a way, at some point, no matter how many followers you had, you guys still had to sit down and record your first podcast. And it's not going to feel that comfortable. It's going to feel scary clicking publish and having people, either no one view it or everyone view it. It's kind of scary ways. And it is that putting yourself out there side that everyone seems quite scared to do, despite publicizing so much of life online. It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense when you think about like so much of what we see online is the end product or is like I always say, like a highlight reel or best bits. And I think it's complex expecting ourselves and others to show the bad stuff. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily right either. I think it's human nature that we would show like all the best bits in the end product and all the amazing stuff. But then it does create this like weird sense that trying anything and not being at the end, at the finish line first day is really embarrassing. When it isn't embarrassing, and actually I think I still feel this every day of my life. Like, I don't feel like I've got my head screwed on when it comes to trying stuff. Like, I definitely feel embarrassed a lot about most things, I think. But I think so I've had to get in my head, like, I would be more not embarrassed, but I'd be more ashamed of myself to look back on my life and be like, oh, you just never tried anything, so now you have nothing. And that is equally as embarrassing. Like,
that's the death.
Yeah.
You already died. Like, that's nothing. That's a nightmare.
It's kind of not an option. It's like either you do the embarrassing thing and you try, or you die.
Yeah.
That's the Sephy and Wing way of putting it. Do you want to die? Or
imagine the person that you are meeting the person you could have been.
Exactly.
Totally.
At that point, you think, well, goodness, I'm just going to start my YouTube channel and see what happens, or start up my Etsy account or whatever. Literally, whatever floats your boat.
Yeah.
But then, what do you guys think about the perception of failure or the fear of failing? Because you kind of alluded to that there. about, you know, you still feel almost embarrassed like day to day, and you guys have been doing the podcast for like many years. You have so many people who are tuning in. Like, no one would look at your podcast and think failure at all. And I know you're kind of like,
They don't know what's going on.
Two people here that would. I know one person who would.
But what do you think about failure and the perception of failure?
Well, I also think it's very marketable as well. It's obviously like a very like, you know, it's so shameful, and everyone carries a lot of like stress about not being good enough. But also, I think especially in this kind of era and this moment of the internet in particular, we've seen like brands and businesses recognize that there is a lot of like social leverage in authenticity and things like that, and like being relatable. So I think you'll find a way to make yourself feel not good enough. However that works for you, you'll always find new and exciting ways to make yourself feel bad. Because I think it is a little bit of a dichotomy in that I've sometimes felt like, if I do really well and like, oh my God, I can just like, you know, be on really great form. And then it's like, oh, but actually I wasn't being myself. And now I'm not relatable. And then you don't really get to enjoy it. And it's all just for, what was that for?
What was the point in that moment where you began it? For just to have to perform a version that looks like unfailable, but also relatable. And it's just like, what is... Then you failed. Cool. Then you're back to death again.
All roads just lead that to death.
Yeah. The theme here.
Yeah, it kind of is. I think it's I think for us it took a long time as well to find finding our voice. Sounds like it's really cringe, like all of these phrases you end up saying when we have conversations like this. Like, I can't help but be really cringe, but because it's true, it's like, oh, it is kind of about finding your voice, and it is about like, you know, believing in yourself, or like having an ambition, or like, I think it's kind of, it's really, really hard. But the sooner you can get your head around like, oh, I actually may as well try, because either way I'm going to be a bit embarrassed and a bit miserable, and, you know, ups and downs and whatever. So I may as well just do the thing. That's definitely, I think, the better, safer option. Weirdly, I think it's more safe to try and then look back and be like, oh, thank God for that, than not do that. And I think I always love seeing people share their failures. I always see it as like, it's almost like when you see somebody else's failure, it's like, oh, I wouldn't have even thought of it in that way. I wouldn't have seen it that way. I feel like I have a very flattering eye to other people. I kind of assume everyone's like thriving and doing amazing. So it's like really nice when you get those little moments from someone of, you know, they're not feeling like they're doing that great. I think it is really important to share.
Yeah.
It's like the social media effect of that, the flattering eye. But then interestingly, it's like who like decides when we're good enough? Like, who are we giving that? Like,
nobody.
That person who, you know, they might not even exist, or it might be like 10 different people who are also doing the top of their field things, all in different areas. Or maybe it's this invisible person who we've kind of put up in this pedestal because we have this flattering opinion of them, because we only ever see them through social media. It's really weird, because when we actually think, okay, who am I actually allowing to validate me and my actions and who I am as a person? It's quite difficult to come down to like an actual person in the sense, I think, especially in the online world. I think previously people would have, you know, maybe from like their parents, or maybe, you know, it would have been that kind of insular side. But now we're open to so many people who don't even know us, or who live in the complete other side of the world, that we've actually outsourced this validation to a way that it's never, ever, we're never going to get it. Like, we're never going to meet all people who we've put up in this pedestal, which might not even be real, because as you say, it's a highlight reel. So it's kind of catch-22. We're never going to win situation unless we meet it head on and actually say, hold on, maybe I actually can validate my own success and my own like self. It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, but
do you know what?
Yeah, go on.
Oh no, go on.
No, you go, please.
You're really speaking to this concept that we have on the podcast, that I feel like, when were you thinking this as well? Because I feel like it's just such a...
Well, I saw your little giggle on your face, but I thought, where's she off
I don't know she'll be thinking about. Okay, maybe you weren't. So we this is something my mum says, like it's her kind of phrase that she has quite a few little phrases, but we've just sort of used it on the podcast quite a bit. But she always talked about this concept of the imagined audience, which is like kind of when you're doing something, who are you really doing it for? And actually, if you really boil it down, often when you're posting something or doing something public, you will have this idea of like who your imagined audience, who you sort of are posting that for, who you are doing that for. And often if you boil it right down, it's like someone from school, someone that you don't know anymore, a teacher, a kind of even like your friend's parents. Like it will be someone so fucking irrelevant, a crush that you had 10 years ago, someone that literally is completely irrelevant. But there is often this sense of like who you are trying to get validation for, actually when you sort of call them by name and they don't become this imagined figure, this like mystical sort of ether figure of just like the collective, when you get the person who it is that you're truly doing that to impress or that for, it's like, God, I don't give two, can I swear on this? Facts. They think about me. So what is that about?
Yeah, what is that about?
Yeah.
I agree with you. And also, like, in that kind of sense, when it is really abstract, there's always going to be someone. It's like you said, it is never ending. So it's like, just kind of find the loophole that allows you to stop thinking about everybody else. I personally find it impossible. So let me know, anyone, if you've got any tips on that. But I think it's like a lifelong thing, to be honest.
It's really hard because there's the rational self and then there's the irrational self. And of course, the irrational self will feed into that egotistical, imagined audience. You know, who's looking at that and what do people think about, you know, how many likes my Instagram photo got, or how many, like what shoes I'm wearing, or all of these things, which actually like we in ourselves wouldn't notice someone else. And everyone is kind of centered in on that outward perception so much that we actually don't really notice the other people who are doing the thing, because everyone is kind of looking inwards. So it's that weird kind of it doesn't really exist. It's that imagined audience. I think imagined is a really interesting word to use because it just doesn't really exist, but it lives so much. And I think a lot of it is the confidence thing as well, of actually putting yourself out there. And I know for me, like, you know, I initially would be a bit more, I'm just going to speak to all of these amazing people, but I'm not going to put anything in. I'm just going to ask them questions. But then I'm like, well, what's the value then for me? Like, what am I giving? Do you know, I want to be able to learn more. And I think a lot of it is you learn by like externally processing. Certainly I'm an external processor. And I think that's actually quite helpful because it does gain confidence. And then it means that you can use that in everyday life. You can literally speak to anybody, you know, because you have that confidence in who you are, the authentic self. You know what your yes is, you know what your no is, you know kind of where you're going. But I think that's all very easy to say when the rational self is speaking. But the irrational self can just swoop in before you even know it. And then you kind of have this, oh my goodness, I'm not good enough. These people think I'm silly, but again, who are you actually talking about? Yeah. And it just actually like hits you like a big existential crisis all at once.
Yeah.
Which is quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
Very.
I always say as well, like, there can be such a kind of discrepancy between what you think and what you feel. Like, sometimes you might know something, like in like you say, in your rational mind, you can understand that, like, you know, this doesn't necessarily mean that I am this or X, Y, and Z. But what you feel in the moment might not necessarily be like from a logical place, but also validate it and be like, it's okay that I'm feeling this way though, and I understand where that's coming from. But also I know that might, you know, there can just be such a gap, I think. And I always feel like I get lost sometimes in like, oh, why am I so upset about this, and this, when I know it's that, or like, I know that shouldn't affect me. And it's like, but you are human and it's fine. And you can know these things and also go through human emotions and then kind of come back and analyze it and figure it out later.
Because also these things don't come down to rational things. They're like evolutionary things, like jealousy, the need to be the best. All of these things are, they have like evolutionary benefits. Evolutionary benefits. Like I don't really know much about evolution, just gonna put that out there. I know enough to know that that's why we have these.
Yeah.
I really am a big fan of like Darwinism, having read nothing and knowing nothing about it.
Yeah. Concept.
Love the vibes that he's giving. Yeah, these things, they have benefits. Like, it's not they don't need to be rational. They're not things that make sense. That's why you feel it, but you can think your way out of it. You can be like, right, okay, or you think you can think your way out of it, be like, right, but I know that I'm not jealous of that person, I love that person, blah blah blah, but I don't even want what they have. But it's like, but there is something woven into your being that is telling you they're a threat. I need to be better, I need to do this, blah blah blah. That is not it's why thinking, oh, this isn't rational, doesn't always help. It's like, the thought is still there, the feeling is still there, because that's kind of what you are like literally built on.
I think when we look at the like evolutionary psychology, it is so fascinating. And I spoke to a lady, she's a naturopath, which is basically, she's interested in natural medicine, and she was really fascinating. She kind of was talking about fight, flight, or freeze, and how if you feel really stressed and anxious, and then you do some exercise, you know, whether it's like go for a run or go to the gym or anything, have this sense of calm, which we would associate with endorphins afterwards. And she said, because if you were in that anxious state, it probably would biologically mean there's some sort of threat, you know, there's some sort of danger. So you would run away from that danger, therefore doing the exercise part. And then afterwards you would be safe. So you feel happier, you feel more comfortable. And I was like, wow, that makes so much sense. And it's so basic in that level, that this is why we feel all of these things. This is why we feel more calm after exercise. This is why, you know, we feel like we need to do something when we have all of this pent up energy and we feel quite on edge. If we work with it, and suddenly there's this less friction, less of a fight against this needing for, I don't know, this approval which doesn't even exist. Because of course social media is not exactly natural. Do you know, it's very we have created it, and our brains weren't developed necessarily to be able to know it. And the amount of content that we actually consume is frightening.
I'm scared personally.
I'll put my hand up.
I'm shaking over here. I'm terrified.
Yeah. But it's also the thing where, like, knowing to go for a run, or it requires being able to like verbalize, like put kind of words to, oh, I'm feeling anxious.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is even like a struggle for a lot of people, because when you're in that mood or when you're in that phase, you don't feel like, oh, I can see that I am feeling anxious right now, I'm going to take some breaths and I'm going to go outside, I'm going to go for a walk or whatever. You feel like the world is ending, I'm so terrible, oh my God, da, 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 da. And like even being able to recognize it is a skill that I think we're like always needing to build as humans, like being able to identify that you're feeling a symptom of, for example, anxiety, rather than you're feeling the reality of being a terrible person. Like I can get those two confused very easily all the time, and being able to have the space to be like, oh, I recognize that I'm not feeling great, I'm going to go for a run. That I think is like impressive in itself. Because I do kind of feel like we're not, maybe in our generation, I definitely feel like children, again, I'm not an expert on children, but I do feel like as our generation gets slightly older and people are having kids and stuff, I can see the way that a lot of younger children are being raised with an awareness of like mindfulness and like their feelings and like all the gentle parenting stuff, and just even like kids having an awareness of their mental state, I feel like has changed so much over the past like 20 years. Because I definitely feel like when I was growing up, there was no awareness of like, you're stressing out and that's okay, or like, you're crying and that's because you might be hungry, or da da da. Like that language just wasn't there. So I feel like it is quite exciting to see how much like we will benefit socially from being able to recognize like, oh, we have brains and they go through ups and downs, and this is how we can deal with that. I know it sounds really simple, but I don't think it has been that simple for us historically.
If you feel a certain emotion, say you feel like a bit annoyed about something, and you actually think, okay, I'm going to step back, what is it? There's generally like something that's pinpointed that has sparked off this anger. And sometimes you think, wait, hold on, it was that, and you have this whirlwind of like, oh my goodness, and then this is rubbish, and then I'm a terrible person, as you say, and it goes and escalates so quickly. But if we take a step back and actually look at it, we think, oh wait, it was just because, you know, my top I was going to buy sold out online and I can't get it anymore.
Yeah, literally.
Then, because you think, I have like been on the edge of ruining my entire day, probably been a not very pleasant person for myself or anyone around me because of that one thing. So
Yep.
it is really difficult for the, again,
I know it well.
rational self to kind of correspond with each other. Because as you say, if we could only take a step back to, well, you're feeling anxious, you should go get some fresh air, you should lie to yourself. But it's not that easy at all. It's very hard. You have to really put it into action. And it's hard as well, depending on what emotion you're feeling. If it's anxiety, you know, it's really, really hard. If it's anger, maybe it's a bit easier to identify the cause.
Also, I feel like with these things, you can get so stuck in your head. Like, it's actually, yes, it's anxiety, or yes, it's anger, all of these things. Those things are not thoughts, those are sensations. Like, it is actually an issue of the body when those things are happening. And we've been speaking on the podcast loads recently, actually over the last like year or so. I definitely have had a thing recently where I was like, right, okay, so if I was feeling anxious, what is actually going on? Yeah, the thoughts are going, but like actually if I break it down, it's like, oh, I've got a stomach ache, like my belly is aching right now, or like my hands are really hot, like my jaw is clenched, like, and once you sort of relieve those things and just notice like, okay, so I've got a stomach ache, like the feeling of anxiety is a stomach ache. Like thoughts aside, everything, that is actually what that is for me often. It's like it's a stomach ache and my heart is going a bit fast. It's like, okay, well, I can sit with that. Like the thoughts, going into the thoughts, that realm is not usually that helpful to me. Like, and that comes before putting the name on like, okay, so I'm experiencing anxiety. It's like, right, okay, what is actually going on right now? Hot hands, feet are tingling away. Like what is going on here? And actually when you boil it down to that level, it really, it changed my view, because then you start to get quite curious on like, okay, so wait, I was there.
What's going on?
Yeah, it's like it's crazy to be like, okay, so because the top that I wanted was sold out, now like my back is aching. It's like, sorry, like what's literal fuck? But like, genuinely, we ignore these things so much, and it's like, oh my god, like my stomach is aching because this person said that thing 3 hours ago that I'd completely ignored. It's absolutely insane when you start like tuning into it.
Yeah,
you always need to address it, solve it, and then otherwise it's just going to follow you around and you're kind of stuck in this cycle of all of these things. But then going, I guess, back to, if we're going to delve into a bit of the evolutionary psychology, you know, showing any vulnerabilities or any weaknesses is, again, something that we aren't really naturally going to be doing as easily. Do you know, like animals like roll onto their back, it means they're the most vulnerable, so they only do that if they're very comfortable. So then, therefore, recording a podcast together with your friend and putting it online about how you're feeling, what you're doing, you know, what you're struggling with.
It doesn't sound like a good idea, does it?
Back and allowing anyone to attack you. So how has that vulnerability been, and like putting yourself out there online? Like, how has that experience been, actually being raw and honest? And actually, because if you weren't authentic, then no one would listen, because you're just kind of telling everyone how good you are. Like, you need to kind of put yourself out there a bit for people to actually think, okay, this is why I like listening. Do I relate to this? It's helpful, it's interesting. How's that process been?
I think I just know that's what I like. So, or like that is the stuff that I've grown up being drawn to. So I think it came really naturally just to do that. Like it was never a thing of like, shall we do something really? Shall we lie on our backs and let the internet lick our bellies? I never thought, let's do something super vulnerable.
Never thought that in my life.
Never in my life. Didn't cross my goddamn mind. But maybe it should have. Like maybe it should have.
Years later, you suddenly realise.
Yeah, I think it just came really naturally. Also, I could not sit. I can barely say something that I don't believe to someone I don't care about. I could not sit across from Wing week in, week out, twice a week, in fact, saying stuff I didn't believe. Like it would destroy me. Like I think we just have that. I genuinely would. Like we have
destroy
that.
Me.
Who it would.
No, it would. I believe.
And I would in turn destroy everything else. Like it. I think that is what the dynamic is. So it came very naturally then, just to like. Obviously, there's the step of like, okay, I need to get my head around the fact there are people here, but it was never a question of like, shall we do something authentic or shall we do something not? It was just the only option, like, is to do something where we do kind of spill our guts. That is sort of it.
Yeah, I think as well, like, as you say, when we started, you're putting something out to 0 listeners. And so
Yeah.
like we recorded like for a long time, just the two of us and like holding the microphone, and it's like, oh, but no one's actually on the other end.
Yeah.
And like, I hope there will be, but like there isn't. So then when people start coming in, I think that was kind of a shock. Or like when you, like, I think like reading comments and stuff, even though everyone's very nice,
Was a shock. Yeah.
it can be shocking.
To you there.
Yeah, honestly, it's like, who let you guys in? It's like, oh, I welcomed, this is what I wanted. I paid to find us here. Yeah. I said, come on down. Hear ye. Like, town crowd, we invited everyone here. And then when suddenly people are there, it's like, oh, shit. I wasn't prepared. Or like, I think I thought in my head what that might be like. And actually, it's quite different. And I think the main thing for me is I kind of thought, like back when I was 22 and I thought this wouldn't ever happen for me. I would never have like a thing or whatever. I think I thought if I were to have something like that, like if I were to have a podcast, like me and Sephy had a podcast, and people were listening and like, oh my God, and we had episodes and we had merch and people were commenting, I would be so confident. I would feel so good. Like
someone
that would
else
be amazing. And it's like, yeah, but if I had that achieved, if I had achieved that goalpost, I would be somebody else. And it's not true. It's not true at all. I'm still me, and I'm worse. In fact, like it gets messier. And I think having eyes on you or ears on you, kind of amplifies stuff that was already there, or like anything you've got going on mentally, anything you're worried might come up for you. Inviting more people to view it only amplifies that, and it doesn't fix it. It doesn't make you think, oh yeah, that's all good now. It makes you think, okay, I really need to deal with this because now people are watching me deal with it. And we still are like, you know, small and cozy, and we walk down the street and nobody's like moved, everything's fine. Like we're not dealing with like being public on a big scale, and yet I still feel the impact. And I feel like I think consciously a lot, and I probably more like last year I felt it's a big thing for me. I still kind of am thinking it on a low level, like, am I cut out for this? Like, am I capable of doing this? Because I think some people are really good at laying back and getting their bellies out for everybody. And I'm not very good at that. But I like really love it, and I really believe in it, and I really want it.
There's the problem.
There lies the issue. Figuring out how can I do this? And I think that about most things, to be honest. How can I do this, even if it's just like walking down the street or whatever? How do I do this normally? I think it's maybe, again, it's going to go on forever, but definitely starting with 0 listeners in a way is really devastating, and in a way is so nice and safe. You can figure it all out, and you're still kind of in private, really. And also we have the two of us, and I don't know how you do it. To be honest, I like really don't know.
It's a bit of a weird one because we talked about this earlier, but you know, because I speak to a different person every week, which is really fun because I get to speak to different people every week. But you do have that, you know, few minutes of chat before recording. You've never met this person before. You've kind of spoken to them on email or Instagram or whatever. And generally, you know, I won't ever have spoken to them before. They won't ever have heard of me before. Maybe they've listened to some episodes. You know, some people are, oh, I actually really like your podcast. Of course I'll come on, which is great because they kind of know what to expect. But a lot of the time, they're like, okay. And you have to, I've heard another podcaster talk about it. And it's like, that's when you have to convince them you're normal. You have like a 30-second elevator pitch to make sure that you're not some weirdo. And, you know, sometimes their shoulders will drop. Sometimes you can be 25 minutes in and suddenly it clicks. And then you're there and you're like, great, okay.
Yeah.
Like, you know, maybe that's the person with an hour cut off and you think, damn. But, you know, it is that listening to people, responding to people. And in the same way that you are kind of aware and conscious of, I want to be authentic, I want to be real, this is why I'm doing it. And you guys have each other for accountability. But yeah, it is quite scary sometimes coming onto a podcast, because anyone who has to phone someone who they've never spoken to before, or meet someone they've not like met before, it is quite scary. You have to put yourself out there. So I guess I don't overthink it maybe as much as I should do, just because I'm like, well, okay, this is happening. This is what it is. But I guess it is kind of scary, and it is something that it's quite a lot sometimes. But, I mean, it is the joy of it, I guess. A varied conversation. It's just very different styles, which I think is what's so great about podcasting.
Yeah, definitely.
We're all doing the same thing, but you guys are doing it in such a different style than I am. Yet we can still sit here and have a really interesting conversation with depth and substance to it. That's the joy of it.
Yeah, I like that, because I think that's like podcast getting respected as like a medium and a form, really. Like, they're different genres. It's like an interview is a different genre to whatever the fuck we do. Mess.
Like, you definitely give us a lot of credit. We get to kind of camp under your umbrella. Yeah, podcasts are worthy.
Yeah, and then will be like ones like Serial that are like literally fiction podcasts. Like, I just think it's like podcast is not one thing. Like, I feel like it is moving into as it develops as a thing, it is a whole medium of stuff with loads of different genres within that. Like, yeah, they're all so different, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what you were saying about, you know, maybe you don't overthink it enough. I actually think I really need to get some lessons from you, because I think that's actually the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I actually recently have been thinking, I don't know if I've said this out loud, Sephy, but I've been thinking, like, basically, what is wrong with us? And like, why? Almost like we think we're so smart, but we're not smart enough to like curb the overthinking. Like, we're not smart enough.
We're not smart. When did we think
we're actually smart? Yeah, like, do you know what I mean? Like, we have all the, oh God, we get so meta, and it's like, oh, my podcast, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
That's not helpful. Like, most of the time, not helpful. Most of my thoughts, not helpful. Not listening to her anymore. Like, it's not actually valuable to me most of the time. So I think doing it and, like, you know, having the action come before the thought is very important if you actually want to do something vulnerable or creative or new for you. And I also wanted to ask, you said that some people only get good like 25 minutes in. Where do you think we're ranking right about now?
Okay, you guys were off to a start 1 second in. I knew.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Lovely.
We don't like to disappoint people. It's like a big thing for us.
We'll keep you here all day if we have to. We'll make you like us.
Yeah.
Are we good yet? Yeah. No worries. Yeah, it is interesting, the whole concept of oneself and how we perceive ourselves and how by others. I feel like it's just such a rabbit hole that we could just, like, there's an endless kind of thought of that. I also want to talk about purpose, and it's something that I personally felt with the podcast journey. Even if, like, you know, no one was listening, obviously that would be really sad and depressing, and I'm not sure I have the resilience to keep going if no one was listening. However, it does provide a purpose, the podcast. Do you know, I can speak to people who I want to speak to in industries that I'm interested in and have these meaningful conversations of depth and substance, which I think can be quite rare sometimes. Do you know, it's really hard to actually, you know, when you speak to someone and suddenly they kind of look slightly and you think, okay, I maybe went in a bit too hard there.
Like, too far.
I know it well.
It's not a Sephy and Wings situation.
No.
And they kind of give that look and you think, okay, this is a small talk vibe, is it? You know, maybe I got it wrong. But it's really rare to get that conversation of depth, and I think that's kind of what we're all seeking. What do you think the concept of purpose? And you guys have been doing it for a lot longer than I have, so I'm interested to know what your purpose is, because even when you started out and, you know, you didn't have the audience that you do now, it still would have provided the same purpose and the same fulfillment in different ways, maybe, and an output of creativity. Because creative people, it's quite interesting. I learned this recently, that creative people actually procrastinate a lot more, because you can't sit down and do a 9 to 5 and create creativity. Like, you burn yourself out. You cannot do 8 hours straight of creativity. Whereas I find myself, you know, I'll be more procrastinating. I'll be, I'm doing this, you know, wandering about a little bit more. Because then when I need to create, I can create. And I think that allowing, okay, actually that's normal for creative people to be a bit more like airy-fairy, not as productive as other people who can just kind of sit down and get on with it. Yet it's still producing the best quality work that you can do. So that's a little side tangent that we can maybe go into as
No,
well.
I
in
like
terms of
that.
that. Take it away.
No, it's so true though, because I feel like creativity and capitalism work in opposition. So like the monetization of creativity in the way that our society has done it kills it. Like they work directly in opposition to each other. You should like, it's why people like so many, like I see it so much at the moment with like sort of art, like musical artists, singers, whatever, being like, I'm not getting paid. Like they're people with like millions of streams and all of this stuff, and it's like, yeah, they still work 9 to 5 jobs. Like our society does not want to pay for that, and it expects to get it for free, which also I love being able to get music for free and things like that, but it obviously doesn't make it easy for the people that create the music, unless they are Taylor Swift, to do that. Like I feel like, yeah, creativity and capitalism, they will always be at odds, really.
Yeah, I agree.
And purpose? What's your thoughts on purpose?
Go on, Wing, you take that.
Oh. Well, I feel like we always say, just between us and also on the pod, we've definitely said before, like, I don't feel the craving. I don't feel like I'm not getting my voice heard anymore. Like, I feel like before the podcast, I used to think, oh, I've got something to say.
Yeah.
And just kind of, and then it just goes nowhere. And now with the podcast, I definitely feel heard. That's for sure. That's one way of putting it. I feel very much like it's such a luxury to have the outlet. And I feel like if I have something to say, I have the place to put it. That said, when I have anything worthy of saying, I kind of forget about it, or like I don't necessarily come to the podcast being like, right, here's my agenda of things that I wanted to make sure I got out into the world.
I think we do.
Yeah,
I think we come in with like strong, like that's been one of the nice things that we can really like when we are passionate about something. We go on and on and on. Like, there's no need anymore to do like an angry tweet at something. Not that I was ever really doing that, but I feel like that's where that manifests, like fuming in my journal. It's like I'll just be like, oh bloody hell, guys, like,
yeah,
my
put it on
passport is
you,
delayed, and I'm fuming about
yeah,
it,
just trauma dump to you guys. Sorry about that.
That external processing. Do you know you have to get it somewhere?
Yeah.
It's actually quite an interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah, the creative output needs to go somewhere, and where your place to put it.
Yeah.
And I think like having that outlet it feeds into that bigger idea of like, what am I here for? Like having that, like having the vehicle, having the way, that space, that angle, that way in of like, we are so lucky that like, I remember that was one of the first things that I was like, really took me a while to process that. We can put on our story saying, how do you feel about your parents' divorce? Yeah. And then like a lot of people come in and they say
with their like most intimate,
really vulnerable
stories.
Things. Yeah, that is like a luxury beyond words. And also weirdly, like, why is that all I've ever wanted? Like, why is that? That is what I want. Like, I want to be able to reach particularly young women. And I think that was always the aim when it was High Priestess, when it was tarot and astrology, when it was just us in the living room, when it was us on Instagram. Every form that it's had has always been like, we want to speak to and for young women, being able to like put that into action and see young women respond to it and see any listener respond to it has kind of like blown my mind. I feel like it's warped my sense of like the world. Like I feel like it's made me think like, oh, when you have something intriguing to you, it's not necessarily not going to happen. Like I thought when I was 22 that would never happen. It's like, not necessarily. And I kind of looked at the world and I thought there's no room in there for Sephy and Wing. Like that's not even a thing. And I always think there are so many versions of this world probably where there isn't that little spot in people's lives reserved for Sephy and Wing. It so easily could not be there if we just a couple of times decided not to do it, or a couple of times thought, oh, I really, can't bother to push through it. It wouldn't be a thing. The sense of purpose and like fulfillment is literally beyond words.
Yeah. I would say there are kind of two. like there's like the purpose for us individually, that I want us to have like cool, free lives where we can do what we want and do this thing and be free, essentially, and like be have the lives we want to have. That would be an internal purpose that I would have for us. And then I would say the wider purpose would be like, I would want young women specifically to listen to us. It make their lives better. They potentially feel empowered. They feel like they can make decisions based on what they want to do. Like, I love when people say like, well, I kind of love it, it's kind of rude as well, people are like, you're like our older sisters. And I love it. How old are we talking? But I do also love it because
I've mother's first marriage, or
like genuinely, like, imagine who were they, like that old hag in the corner. But I think that is something that is really important, like women having, I wouldn't necessarily call us guides in any way, but I feel like it would have been helpful for me to have like role models a bit older, just that aren't perfect, that are a bit messy and scrappy, but are like showing they're leading by example, in sense of like being themselves, doing what they want to do. That's kind of the only thing I want for women, to be able to like with confidence do what they want to do and feel cool about that. And I hope that's what we are modeling in a messy way and all of that. And I just wish, I think my hope is that women find it like a safe space to listen, feel good about themselves, feel like a collective of women, and feel that they can do whatever the fuck they want and like not live within the limitations that are literally handed down to them, and know that's bollocks. That's what I want.
Using those swear words up.
I have.
I think that when you said about, is there space for me in the internet? But the thing is about the internet is there's an endless amount of space. Like, that's the cool thing. It's not like, we've got to pitch a film to Universal Studios and they only have a quota of 10. Like, because anyone can do anything, there's an endless amount. You're not going to say, oh, actually, I've reached my quota of new artists for this year. So even though I like their songs, I'm not going to add it to my playlist. It is endless. It's not that you have to buy a new record or a film or whatever people used to do. It's endless now, which is really cool. And then, like, leaning on to the older sister thing, I think a lot of it is friendships. I think people view you as friends, and because you guys are talking about, your deepest, darkest secrets, or like metaphorically, lying on your back as the animals would do, then you are leading by example and say, okay, asking the difficult questions, like, how are you actually feeling about, your parents' divorce, which maybe no one's actually asked them before, because they just kind of go like, oh, how are you? Do you know? Or those kind of pity things. Whereas your head, like, I think it's quite unusual to knock things head on, because a lot of people are scared of that reply, or the awkward sensation. But actually allowing people, by proxy, you're allowing them to actually have a voice themselves, have an outlet themselves. And I think there's a huge rise in therapy, and maybe it's because things are talked about a bit more. But then a lot of it, and again, I'm not an expert at all, and there's definitely a place for therapy, and I'm not trying to say that anything about that. But I think a lot of it is being heard. And then by them saying that in that space to you, a lot of it is being heard. And not that you have to reply to them and have this whole conversation and build this whole friendship out of it. But maybe even if you just like the message or whatever, suddenly they're like, hey, cool, I'm not a weirdo. I'm not, it's that validation, what you were saying before, that you wanted to start a podcast and you got your friend to start it with you because then you felt validated to do that. We're not that complicated. And I think friendship hasn't really changed that much, our need for friendship. But the dynamic of which friendship works now in this digital age where we live, we're all located completely different places, which is amazing because we can have this conversation online. However, it's not like we can go afterwards and just go grab a sandwich and actually chat about, what's going on in our life. So you do miss that part of, you kind of get the transactional side of, we've got this recording, that's really great because technology's allowed us to do that. But you don't necessarily get the emotional side of it, which if you miss that with friendship, then I think that can have a big effect. And it will lead into loneliness and all of these things like further down the path. Which, again, it's hard to identify those feelings in the time that you're at. I feel like all of this is kind of linking together of what we've talked about earlier.
sometimes like on the pod, even just with Sephy, I'm like, I just want to underline everything you just said. Like, I just want to like put that in bold of like, yes, so true. I think it's like, and like I keep saying, like, I feel like these things are like lifelong. And I definitely as well feel like a lot of response that we've had from listeners, we have often said like a lot of people will be saying maybe the same thing but in different words, or like people from different countries or continents talking about a similar experience at a similar time. And also I think we have a bit of a weird ability to like talk about things right at the time, and someone will be like, oh my god, this is like happening to me right now. I think it's more so about people find the things that they need right at that moment. But it's been really affirming to see a lot of people dealing with similar issues, because it does kind of put into perspective that a lot of these emotions that we deal with, they're just universal feelings and it's not personal to us. And it kind of makes the laying on your back and being vulnerable easier, because I always think like it's not, the podcast isn't really about us, even though it's totally about us. The whole thing is us. All we talk about is us. And the only people that are speaking is us. It's very us. But I think the only reason that it means anything to anybody is because of where the listener is at in that moment.
Yeah.
And their response to it and what they project back onto it and what that means for them. Like kind of, we're only as funny as you allow us to be. Like if you are feeling kind of giggly that day, you might actually let out a laugh rather than just like more air coming out of your nose for a second. Like you might, you know, really be there in that moment, and that's down to you as the listener. Or like you might be in a particular place where you're dealing with a certain thing. Us talking about it is just kind of the vehicle for you to explore that as the listener, rather than really much about the specific content that we are putting out or where we're coming from. I feel like we're just very lucky to be received by what I would say the best demographic in the world, young women.
Yeah.
Like no one will be kinder. There's no more of a gentle touch that you'll find, like the warmest arms to fall into. Young women are like, so their eye on us is so loving, and it is like a very strong connection. Like they've heard us cry on the podcast and like laugh tons and like go through ups and downs and move it, all of this stuff. You can't really listen to that week in, week out and feel nothing. And I think that's about them and their choice to be there and participate in it. It's very special.
But they'll also grow up with you. That's kind of they started listening when they were 22. And now people, I imagine, different conversations than you would have had then. Now, you know, as you've kind of gone through life and all of this stuff has happened, you know, you started your podcast before the pandemic. So you've gone through a lot with this podcast and with each other. But, you know, like, if you think about any celebrity who, as we were growing up, like, remember Zac Efron when he was like the hottest guy ever? And
boy, do I remember.
I definitely do remember that.
Yeah.
Think about it often.
Yeah.
But no, he's still attractive, even though, like, if he was like still looked like Troy Bolton, we probably, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's aged with us. Or like all of these YouTubers who remember like the British YouTuber age. Yep. Where it was like, you know, it was solidly there. But now, like, Zoella is having babies, which people who are also watched her when she was doing her makeup or whatever, instead also watching because they're also going through the same life, stage of life, which is really cool. How it's not like you've got, you know, the series of Friends where, you know, what's Rachel Green doing now? We don't know because she doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Yes.
You actually can relate to these people and go through the same stages, which I imagine then as you go older and like women go through like perimenopause and menopause and all of these things that again we talk about. If you have, I don't know if, you know, Zoella is still going to be on YouTube by then, but you know, imagine if you were going through that and she was talking about it, you'd probably be thinking, wow, great, okay, I can actually relate to that. And it's just exactly what you guys are doing as well. You take the audience along with you. They're friends, ultimately.
Yeah. I'm so sorry, I just need to pick up my dog. I'm sorry.
If you've never seen Ozzy before, by the way, he's the cutest thing. God,
I'm sorry.
It's almost a shock to see him.
He needs a haircut. I also think it's kind of there's a dog now. Just for there's a video of this continuity. There's now a dog in my lap. I also think it's the kind of blessing of the internet is that you can pick up, as the viewer or the listener, you can pick up that content when it's meaningful to you. So
Yeah.
you might take a gap from watching Zoe Sugg and then come back to her years later. Like she's doing Vlogmas and she just reached 5 million subscribers on her vlog channel and was like celebrating that milestone of, she was like, I haven't grown followers or like thought about followers in a long time, and now my subscriber count has just gone to 5 million. Like it's interesting to see kind of a revival that I feel like there's this, I wouldn't say cult following because it's like literally millions of people, but tons of young women will find space for and pick up the content that they want as and when they need it, which is why it's like, yeah, having babies might not resonate with you right now, but in a couple of years you might find yourselves kind of scrolling through and being like, oh, is there anyone out there who relates to me? And I think that is definitely what we're doing on the podcast, consciously and unconsciously, is kind of screaming out into the void, like, does anybody feel this way? Does anybody relate to me? Like, am I alone? Are you with me? Sort of thing. I think that's the majority of kind of content like ours, is that feeling of like connection. And I think it's really, really valuable. And I think it's really, really powerful to see it happen with women, because I think so much of what women have been speaking about, like you say, like menopause and stuff, so many of these conversations have not been put on a microphone, that's for sure. So I just think it's so difficult right now. There's so much shit going on. It's always very nuanced. It's very complex. But also I think it's quite nice that women are seeing themselves in other women and are able to have conversations with women that they never would have met before. And I also really like when people say to us, like, you know, you're like our friend, you're like my friend, or I'm not having these conversations with my friends and it feels nice to be able to listen to you guys. That is, like, I think very deeply important.
High praise.
Yeah.
I also want to talk to you guys about, because I think if anyone's listening,
Is anybody out there?
Anybody's out there?
Yeah. The people who are listening may be thinking, okay, this is all well and good, but I can't imagine starting a podcast with my friend and be running a business together. Have there been any fallout? Or again, creative people are great when they're doing it well, but they can also be, you know, drama queens. They can be melodramatic. You know, it can be the end of the world because our top is sold out on ASOS.
Yeah.
That's everyone, to be fair, not just creative.
Creative people hate when their top sells out.
Right?
That's so true.
Honestly, boy, do they.
So how's that dynamic been with you two?
I think we're very balanced. Like,
Same.
I once had a friend that asked me once, like, because she was like, so how do you work with your friend? Like, how does that happen? Like, what happens when she hasn't done the thing that you need? And it's like messaging her, like, the example she gave, she's like, oh, yeah, so she hasn't sent something over. And you would message her being like, where is that? We need that today or something. And I was like, you are confusing. You're putting your expectations of like work language onto this. We do not function like that. I would never, ever, where is it? We need it by today. That is not the dynamic. And I feel like the thing that we have here is like, there's so much room for us as humans, like our insecurities, our issues that we have, are like being quite patient with each other, being very empathetic and understanding with each other. And that comes first. Like that is 100% level one before we get to sitting down and recording and all the like admin of stuff. Like we 100% function. Like the only way that this has become a business, essentially, I don't even know if it has become a business, is because the gateway to that business, like the way that is run, is just as a friendship. Like the thing that comes first is kindness, empathy, all of that stuff, that humor, all the stuff that goes into a friendship. Absolutely, there is no way I would be messaging Wing being like, I need that on my desk by Tuesday, or she'd be messaging me that. That is not how it functions. Yeah.
What would she say?
You'd literally say, go. Oh no, I just swear again. I'm not going to be the swearing one on this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's that perfect phrase of projecting ideas of business onto us, or projecting ideas of working with friends onto us. I feel like that's something even we have had to figure out, is like,
Totally.
oh, I'm not finding this hard, or like, oh, I'm not finding this too much, or I'm not finding this, kind of all the stereotypes that you think about. I don't think they've come up for us in the way that I would expect, or like, I haven't found it to be a struggle
too close,
with my
too
friends.
intimate.
Yeah,
We love
it
it.
hasn't happened like that. And I think actually one of the most important things we've done is been able to make that separation of like, we are not just going to follow the ideas of how this might be and like create space because we think we should, or try and follow like rules or ideas about what this should look like, and more just be aligned and conscious, like intentional and conscious about how we feel and what we want, and what, you know, what can we shake up to be better? Cool. What can we work on? Cool. What should we add? What should we lose? Perfect. And like being flexible and working on it, rather than following an idea about what we think we should do. I think that goes for all things as well. We always like to do things a bit weird in our own way.
Totally.
And who's that person who's saying this is how you should do it? It's like that person who's saying you're not good enough. It's that invisible audience again. Your mum is right.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It's the imagined boss that we've given ourselves that is like, you guys are going to find this really hard. And I think it kind of is that anxious brain of like sussing out, trying to identify the threats even before it's happened, of like, well, this is doomed. This is going to go wrong. Two friends doing a podcast. Yeah, right. Two girls on the internet being happy together. Absolutely not. You know, like, we are always like trying to identify where we're going to fall short, and almost like, when the other shoe is going to drop, and just trying to get ahead of what our problems are going to be. So much so that then I think that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of you create the issues that aren't necessarily there, or they don't have to be there. And I think it's been really helpful for us to be like, this is working and we are good and we do have balance, and we should enjoy that rather than like creating any issues. But I think it's really valid for people to have issues working with friends and stuff. I think that happens all the time.
No, 100%. But I think that's when there might be just an incompatibility there for sure. But like, that's why it's like, don't rush into a business with a friend. Like, maybe that's a bit of a crazy move. But we definitely are very like emotionally led as people, I think, which then that just like naturally translated to this, which I would say if I was a business man, if I was a man looking at this going, who knows about the business world and what's probably best to make money and all of the stuff, it wouldn't be emotionally led, have room for empathy and patience and all of the stuff. No. It would be fucking crack these fucking episodes out, tear it to the ground, make a load of money.
Back. Belly out on your lip back. Like, it wouldn't, that's not going to be how we do this. And that's why I think things get burnt to the ground really quickly, because the industry says fucking go until it crashes down. Like, put everything behind, let your ego take over, all of the stuff. Just, this is about money and fame, essentially. We definitely have been intentionally slow with it. Like, I do think it's like, if we completely had no regard for each other, no regard for our well-being, all of the stuff, yeah, sure, I think we could have made some money and then crashed and burned. That would be great. But I don't necessarily want that. I think what we want is something that's like got longevity, that like we both come out of feeling very sane and like balanced, have a good friendship, all of the stuff. But I don't think that is like a smart business move at all. I don't think there's much room for that in honestly, like the industry, quote unquote, like whatever that is. I don't think there is that's something that's encouraged, but I think it's something that is absolutely essential. Like, I wouldn't even want to enter into this without that being like the main, that's the furniture of this place, is that. Well, the foundations.
Yeah. But the fractions,
you know, it's everything. Yeah.
Like two words, furniture. Yes. that use of word. But I think the perception of work and what is hard work is quite weird, because I think if we said that, we'd say, okay, suits, smart dress, stress, strip lighting, 40-hour work weeks, you know, pack lunch at work, you know, not really office friendships, you know, all of these kind of things to associate with. Whereas the thought that you could actually work full time on a podcast, that you record, you know, a few episodes a week and you're not in an office 9 to 5, people would probably find that quite shocking. Again, let's go back to
I'm one of them. It is shocking. It's absolutely insane. It's absurd.
But like the YouTubers, you know, they'll put out content from their life, like living their life. They're not in an office all the time, do you know? And it's still work.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite weird, the perception of work, because it's changed so much. And I think older generations, because we're what age are you guys? I'm 26. So
We're 20. Well, go on, Wing. You go first.
Well, in a couple of weeks, Sephy will be 28.
No, not even in a couple of weeks. In like literally 6 days, I'll be 28. But I am 27. So quick. Wing's 28.
I'm 28.
Yeah. Stage. So we will all kind of gone on social media for the first time, like at the same time.
Yeah.
We've got a mobile phone at the same time. But I think people who are in their 30s, they will also have been like, you know, their perception of work would have been different. You know, they wouldn't have always had social media or the internet or like jobs like this or podcasts, you know, unless they started it at a later stage. But like going into work, the perception of work is quite different. And I think then the expectations of work is also quite different. So flexible hours, working from home, do you know, even salary expectations or what you think you're worth, or actually paid internships, or all of these things. I think it's completely changed. The landscape has completely changed for work. And I think somehow we're all kind of on the same opinion, like at this age and stage. And then the people who are kind of in their 30s are at the same opinion, and the people who are in the 40s. And our parents they've grown up a completely different thing. Like my dad, you know, if I was, you know, working full time on a podcast, how are you doing that? Do you know, like, they don't understand it, which is completely fair enough because it's bonkers. But it's really interesting as well how the landscape's changed for work, and then what we perceive as doing enough work and having a bit of spare time. Is that bad? Does that mean we're, you know, sitting about and not doing our work's worth? And things like that. It's weird, isn't it? That concept of not actually
it's really
our work weeks.
Yeah, it is really complex. I feel like as well, we're weird. We're weird.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of nuance, and I think it is really, really complex, because something I always think about is like, for example, like my dad is like, what the hell? And I am like, what the hell? I think as much as the internet is like open to everybody who can access it, there is an accessibility issue and a privilege issue of like who is allowed to do these things. I don't feel that this podcast is work, maybe controversially. I just don't. I have worked, like real work in my life. This isn't one of those times. It feels like an immense privilege. That's not to say there aren't challenges, but it is a privilege to get to do this and even make any money from it at all is purely a luxury. I think like most people, most functioning humans out there are expected to do like real heavy work. And the internet has warped our perception of like what I don't know, like I think a lot of people who show like their content of like a week in my life or whatever, and they're like, this is me working, and it's a content creator, you know, that isn't necessarily, it's not the same. The concept of work is different. It's not to say that it's not valuable, and it's not to say that it's not amazing, but it is different, and it's not the same as a standard job. And a huge part for me personally, I keep having this thing like where this year we've gone to like so many events, and normally what would happen is a brand or a company would come send an email to our management being like, oh, can Zoella go to this thing? And they're like, no, but how about Sephy and Wing? So we've managed to like go to lots of different things and seen lots of different things this year, and I feel like it's made me pull even more consciously on ideas about like who I am and where I fit in terms of like class. Like I grew up in a very, you know, like a mixed cultural house, a working class house of like second generation immigrants, and it felt like this wasn't an option at all. Obviously it didn't exist at the time, but even more than that, doing anything that I could enjoy as a job was not what I was shown. And that is like a structural class issue, and it's a huge systemic issue. And I think I really struggle with the idea of like having an opportunity here to get to do this, for us to get to do this full time, is so meaningful. And I really don't want to fuck it up. And I also question who I am, because I don't feel like I have ownership over that kind of baby me who like couldn't imagine doing this. I feel like I can't speak for my working class self anymore, but I also feel like I can't speak for somebody in the industry at all. And so what am I, and what image am I portraying? That, like Sephy spoke about, us like prioritizing freedom, like that's one of our things in terms of like why we would want to do this, is because we love the idea of being free. I feel like it's a huge conversation at the moment, the awareness of like the value of your time is really, especially with the pandemic, I think a lot of people are thinking about it. I kind of struggle with the idea of like, what do I represent, or like what image am I giving off to people, or like people that I would see as my peers. Maybe they wouldn't see me as their peer because I have a podcast and I get to talk, and I get some money from that. Maybe I've created a distance there that I have to deal with. But it is a huge luxury, and I think it's really important that the younger generation are able to like make a stand for things and be like, I want to be paid for my time, and you know, like I want to have freedom and I want to have more access to my life. I think that's really, really important and very, very powerful. And I think the more that can reach all sorts of people, marginalized people, young people, everything, it's very, very important. And I feel very passionately about it. I feel very lucky to have a podcast.
Yeah.
I think it's not necessarily that if we are working a 40-hour week, we're not living up to, you know, the freedom that we could have, because they still very much exist. I have worked 40-hour weeks, do you know? And it's not at all bad, but we have the opportunity to, if we chose to, go down a different path.
Yeah.
It's quite a new concept that we have that choice. But then sometimes there's that perception. I think social media really, really exasperates this, because you have the influencer day in the life, or you have, you know, this is why I don't work my 9 to 5, or this is why, you know, you're never going to make enough money and you'll always be working, and, you know, all of these kind of clickbaity things which have horrible titles. But I think that it's that choice that we have now, which is the difference. It's not necessarily that we all can start a podcast and work off our podcast, but we have the choice to start one and give it our best shot. Or we have the choice to work our 9 to 5 in the industry that we want to. Maybe we can work remotely some of the time, or be a little bit flexible. Or maybe we just want to have that traditional work ethic. But I was talking to this guy who is a farmer, and he's approaching retirement. And this isn't on the podcast, by the way. This is just normal life.
Right. I can't wait to listen to that. Yeah.
Spoiler. Then and he was saying, you know, he's got this massive farm with loads and loads of acres, and his son's going to be taking over the farm. And then he said to his son, you know, what if I buy this neighbouring part of the farm? Because, you know, naturally, the more acres that you have, the more successful, because you have more land and everything like that. And his son said, no, I don't want more, because I have enough work here, and I don't want to work as much as you have in your lifetime.
Yeah.
So it's that stand of like, I think that kind of summarises it. It's that choice of, we could buy more land and have a bigger farm, but ultimately he's going to have to work more for it. And if he can live off, you know, whatever he's making now on the amount of land that he has, of course there's like lots of nuances that you can apply to it. But like on surface level, I think it's quite a good example of that choice and that stand of, I want to work hard. I want to do, you know, the farming in the industry that I want to be in the farm that I've grown up in, that is my family's farm. But actually I want to also live my life and spend time with my family and all of these kind of things.
Yeah. I like the priority being maybe fun, enjoyment, like living. And I feel like that's something that we talk about there maybe being like a generational gap between like maybe, I don't know, I experienced the generation above me and like my parents and my grandparents, essentially a lot of it being about like, that's just what you do because that's what we do. Like, we just feel this way. Like, no, we don't need to be happy. We don't need to be sad. We'd all just be fine and just like coast through life. And that is your lot. Like, that is how it goes. How dare you try and, you know, like, even like if I go buy a coffee, takeaway coffee, God, the looks I get. Because actually the comments I get, because it's so scandalous. How dare you do something like this? when actually it's like, look, you know, yeah, I won't be able to buy a house, but I won't ever be able to buy a house. You know, I'm fine. I'm literally fine. I want my little coffee, whatever. And I do feel like there's a bit of tension between the generations, maybe, of like the old. I especially felt it with my grandparents, actually. There being like this idea of, but this is what you should do. Why? Well, because you should. Like, it's like there's not really. I think it probably is a post-war mentality as well of like, well, we've lived through a load of shit here and we're trying to actually give you a nice life. Like, you know, you should be lucky to be alive. And we're there being like, but I want to have fun in my life. Like, is that too much to ask? But I do think it did bring up when I said I was doing this and it's not traditional, blah, 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 there was definitely a lack of, one, they couldn't even comprehend it. But two, it's like, but no, like that's not the right path. That's not the right choice. So I understand. I actually completely get it. Like, I think I'd probably feel very similar if my child or grandchild said they're going to do something completely that I literally have no concept of what that is, let alone how that can make money and make someone happy. I think I would feel really similar, and I really get it. But I think that's a symptom of like not society not being somewhere for these people anymore. Like, it has surpassed their understanding, and that's really sad. But also of a generation like asking for like prioritizing something like happiness, which I don't think was prioritized at all.
No. Yeah.
I think also we can change jobs. Do you know, it's not that you get a job for when you leave school, you get a job and then you're there till you retire.
Yeah.
You know, you could quit the podcast tomorrow and, you know, start off, you know, being a nurse, and then maybe in 2 years later you decide, actually, I'm going to change degrees and I'm going to do French.
Yeah. Don't get any ideas, Sephy. Don't quit the podcast tomorrow.
Don't worry. I don't want to
become
do
a nurse
French
tomorrow. No.
And yeah, you know, we have that freedom again, which is completely different. And as you say, it's not we're not throwing shade on older generations. It's completely.
I'm throwing a bit.
Okay, a lot. Quite light shade.
Yeah.
They throw enough at us. I'm throwing some back.
We'll have our
With love. Yeah.
Yeah.
Friendly fire.
Yeah, just a bit of
Friendly fire.
Yeah, we'll go for that. Friendly fire.
Yeah.
Go for that.
So what's next? Well, what's in the horizon for Sephy and Wing?
I think we really
so much.
Yeah, we want to prioritize the podcast. I feel like that's our safe core thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that is where we thrive in like keeping the conversations really interesting to us. I feel like the best thing there's so many great things, because I was going to say the best thing we experience is when we stop recording and we're like, oh, that was a good one. But actually, I think the best thing we experience is when we meet people who, side note, but just wanted to, just if you're wondering what the best thing is, it's when we meet listeners. But I think one of the best moments we can have is when we wrap up recording and we're still like on FaceTime or whatever, or we're in person and we're like, that was a really good one.
Good.
Yeah, like I feel like I was hearing, I hadn't heard that from you. Like, oh, I didn't know you felt that way. Those sorts of things where it feels like fresh. We've been doing this for a long time, so like keeping it fresh is it's just like it goes up and down. I feel like it, requires us to be in certain moods and things like that. But we definitely want to protect the podcast as like our core thing. And yeah, keep finding fun ways to bring the listener closer and feel like we can really like have proper conversations. Like I said, like we love meeting people in real life, so that's always our priority. So trying to think about some fun events maybe in the new year.
I feel like that's a big thing. Like we've done like a few speaking live things, and in like different settings. Like we've done festival, universities. I think we've got another university one coming up. Like we've done it in a club. Like we've done like most random,
a different speech for each one of those.
Definitely different vibes.
Different person shows up on the stage for all those events, and like I think those have been our most fun ones. Really, like things where we get to go essentially on a stage. Why would it not be fun? It's like it's so cool, and I feel like that's probably the bit of me that can like understand it in a certain way, probably from that like thing of this wasn't a job when we were younger, this isn't a thing. When you feel yourself on the stage, it's like, oh, this is something that I can like physically understand and I feel like proud of. Like I can see the people they're clapping for us even. That makes me feel really like, yeah, that's what I want for us. Like, that's a great, like, I don't know how the fuck we got there, and that feels like really, really, really validating and like amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
Wonderful.
Can we ask what's next for you?
Golly. Well, I'm going to keep on doing my episodes. So very much leaning into women's fitness and wellness. And I think the fun thing about wellness is it really encapsulates all elements of life. So like conversations like this, to interior design, to actual fitness, to, you know, natural ways to help your body, or, you know, talking about so many different elements, your fashion, how you feel, how you look, how you perceive yourself, how the dynamic of friendships or the dynamic of, you know, relationships or anything like that. It really is encapsulated under wellness. It's not just like Lululemon and Pilates. It's very much, it's real. And hopefully that, you know, producing conversations of depth is something I'm really seeking. And like, that's why I love conversations like this, because we're actually, and it's exactly what you guys do. Do you know, people can relate to it. It's not that talking about the best part, you know, speaking about something and this is my best day, and, you know, suddenly this pedestal is like, the bar is this high.
Yeah.
It's actually that relatability of so what happened when it all went wrong? How did you pick yourself up? How did you feel? What did you do? Do you know, normalizing actually going through these stages of life, which I think is the relatable content that we all want to watch, but it's quite scary to put out. So I guess for me personally, it's more being a bit more out there myself, because I think when you're speaking to people, it's quite easy to just ask them questions and not really get out maybe more of my sides of not necessarily weakness, but just experience and opinions. So that's something that I guess is a personal challenge to me. But no, I think it's, as you say, it's such a fun thing to be able to do. The conversations we can have, the outlet that we can have. It's definitely a really good way to spend our time. So yeah, just excited to see how it goes, really. Nice. Enjoyed it.
Excited for you.
Yeah.
Thanks guys. So yeah, thank you also for joining, and
thank you so much.
Well, I'll link your links in the description so people can also.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. This has been so nice, so fun.